The studio in Paris was buzzing with a low, steady hum that only comes from 100 people working together in perfect harmony. It was late at night, but inside the massive building it felt like high noon. The air was thick and warm, recycled over and over again by the heavy ventilation systems. Rows of bright lights hung from the ceiling, beating down on the set. They were necessary for the cameras, but they also made the room feel like an oven. This was the world of John Wick *. It was a world of make-believe, but the sweat and the exhaustion were very real. Keanu stood in the center of the chaos. He was wearing his familiar black suit. It was tailored perfectly, hugging his frame, looking sleek and dangerous. To anyone watching, he looked like the unstoppable killer he played on screen. But if you looked really closely, past the character and the makeup, you could see the toll the long months were taking on him. There were dark circles under his eyes. His movements, though still precise, were a little slower than usual. He was covered in a fine sheen of sweat. They had been filming this fourth movie for what felt like forever. Action movies are not like other movies. You don't just say words and go home. You have to fight, fall, get hit, and jump off things. Then you have to do it again and again until the director thinks it looks perfect. Keanu never complained. He was always the first one on set and the last one to leave. He knew the names of the people carrying the lights and the people sweeping the floor. He would thank them every single day. He carried the mood of the whole set on his shoulders. If he was tired, everyone was tired. If he was smiling, everyone felt better. On this specific night, they were shooting a very complicated fight scene. It took place in a fancy apartment set that looked expensive but was made of cheap wood and paint. There were stunt performers everywhere, dressed as bad guys, waiting for their cue. The director wanted the scene to be fast and angry. The energy needed to be high. Keanu took his mark on the slick floor. He closed his eyes for a second, taking a deep breath through his nose. He went into his zone. That is what he called it. When the cameras rolled, he wasn't Keanu anymore. He was the character. He was the legend. "Action!" the director yelled through a megaphone. Keanu moved. He exploded into motion. He threw a punch with his right hand, then blocked a kick with his left forearm. It was a dance of violence. He slid across a polished table, shattering a glass prop that was designed to break. It looked amazing on the monitor, but as he landed on the hard floor on the other side, something felt wrong. It wasn't a sharp pain at first. It was more like a sudden, deep pressure inside his stomach, right in the center. It felt like someone had reached inside him and squeezed something tight. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The camera was rolling. There were people everywhere. If he stopped now, it would ruin the shot. It would cost money. It would waste everyone's time. He prided himself on not being the person who held up production. So he kept going. He grabbed a stunt actor by the arm and threw him against the padded wall. He grunted, but that was part of the act. The pain was getting worse, though. It was moving from his stomach to his side and then to his back. It felt like a hot iron was being pressed against his insides. He gritted his teeth so hard his jaw hurt. He focused on his feet. Just keep moving, he told himself. Just finish the scene. He ran toward the exit of the apartment set. In the script, he was supposed to jump over a low chair while shooting behind him. He pushed off the ground with his legs. In midair, the pain spiked. It was a white-hot flash that made his vision go blurry for a split second. He landed, but not smoothly. He stumbled. It was a small mistake, a tiny wobble, one that most people wouldn't notice. But the stunt team noticed. They knew his movements better than he did. They saw the wince on his face that he tried to hide. "Cut!" the director yelled finally. "That was great. Let's reset for the next one." The set relaxed. The noise stopped. The bright lights dimmed slightly. The crew rushed in to fix the broken glass and reset the furniture that had been knocked over. Usually, this was the time Keanu would joke around. He would check in with the stunt guys to see if they were okay. He would drink some water and maybe stretch a little. But this time, he didn't stand up straight. He walked slowly over to a wooden crate off to the side of the set. He sat down heavily. He put his head between his knees, trying to catch his breath. He was breathing hard, but it wasn't just from the exercise. He was sweating too much. It was a cold, clammy sweat that made his shirt stick to his back. A young makeup artist walked over to touch up his face, but she stopped when she saw him. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with wide, worried eyes. "You okay, man?" a deep voice asked. It was the stunt coordinator. He had known Keanu for years. They had done dozens of movies together. He knew the difference between an actor tired from a long day and someone who was really hurt. Keanu looked up slowly. His face was pale, almost gray. His lips were pressed together in a thin line. He tried to smile, to brush it off like he always did. He didn't like people fussing over him. "Yeah," he whispered. His voice sounded weak and shaky. Just need a minute, just a cramp, it's nothing." He lied. He knew it wasn't a cramp. He had pulled muscles before. He had broken ribs. He had dislocated his shoulder. He knew what pain felt like. This was different. This was scary. It felt like something inside was tearing apart. He pressed his hand hard against his side, trying to hold the pain in. He looked around the set. He saw the crew working hard. He saw the camera operators checking their screens. He didn't want to be the reason they all had to go home. He didn't want to be the problem. But his body didn't care about his feelings. A sudden, strong wave of nausea rolled over him. His stomach lurched. He closed his eyes tight. The room started to spin. The sounds of the set, the clanging of metal, the voices of the crew, the buzzing of the lights, started to sound like they were far away, underwater. The coordinator didn't believe him. He put a hand on Keanu's shoulder and squeezed. "Keanu, you don't look good. You look really gray. Look at me." "I'm fine," Keanu insisted again, but he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. He tried to stand up to prove it. He wanted to walk it off. He wanted to get back in position and finish the job. He pushed himself up from the crate. His legs felt like jelly. He took one step and his knees simply gave out. He didn't fall all the way to the ground. Two stunt guys were there instantly. They were always watching, always ready. They caught him before he hit the concrete floor. But this wasn't a stunt fall. This was real. He was limp in their arms, his head hanging down. The pain was so bad now that he couldn't speak. He couldn't tell them where it hurt. He just made a low sound, a groan of pure suffering that scared everyone who heard it. The mood on the set changed instantly. It went from a busy workplace to a place of panic. The director noticed. He ran over, shouting for the medic to come now. People stopped moving. They stared. They saw the movie star, the guy who played the invincible assassin, looking small and broken. "Get the car," someone yelled from the back. "We need to go now." Keanu tried to open his eyes. He saw the worried faces looking down at him. He felt terrible for scaring them. He felt guilty. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to say it was just a bad moment and he would be okay in 5 minutes. But he couldn't get the words out. The darkness was closing in on the edges of his vision. The only thing he could feel was the throbbing, burning pain in his gut. They helped him walk, practically carrying all his weight, toward the exit. The bright lights of the studio faded behind him as they moved him into the cool night air. He wasn't John Wick anymore. He wasn't the tough guy. He was just a human being in pain, and he needed help. The transition from the movie set to the real world was jarring, like being pulled out of a deep dream and thrown into cold water. One minute the air was filled with dust and the noise of a fake gunfight. The next, there was only the muffled sound of a car engine and the terrifyingly quiet realization that something was very wrong. They didn't wait for an ambulance. In situations like this, when every second counts and you are in a foreign city, sometimes the fastest way is just to get into a car and drive. A producer opened the back door of a black SUV that was waiting by the loading dock. The interior was cool and smelled of new leather. Keanu practically fell into the back seat. He curled up on his side, pulling his knees up toward his chest. It was a natural, instinctive move to protect his stomach, which felt like it was twisting into a tight knot. A stunt coordinator slid in next to him, while another person jumped into the front passenger seat to direct the driver. As the car pulled away from the studio, the silence inside the vehicle was heavy. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The only sounds were the soft hum of the tires on the asphalt and Keanu's shallow, ragged breathing. The city of Paris was blurring by outside the tinted windows, but Keanu couldn't focus on the sights. The streetlights, orange, white, and red, streaked across the glass like wet paint. Usually he loved looking out at cities, watching the people and the buildings, wondering about their lives. But tonight, his vision was tunneled. He was staring at the black upholstery of the seat in front of him, clenching his jaw so hard his teeth ached. The pain had settled into a rhythm now. It would spike, sharp and searing, making him grip the edge of the seat until his knuckles turned white. and then it would fade to a dull, throbbing ache that made him feel sick to his stomach. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to think of anything else. He tried to remember lines from the script or the shape of a motorcycle he liked, but the pain kept dragging him back. It was demanding all his attention. In the darkness behind his eyelids, his mind started to race. It wasn't a panic about death, but a deep, heavy sadness. He thought about his sister. She had fought leukemia for years, showing more bravery than he ever had on a movie set. He thought about Her Chinese letter in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. Compared to that, he felt like his pain was small, but it was still overwhelming. He felt a sudden, intense need to be strong, to not let the people in the car see how scared he really was. He didn't want to be the burden. "We are almost there," the stunt coordinator said quietly. He didn't look at Keanu. He just kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hand resting near Keanu's ankle, a silent connection to let him know he wasn't alone. Keanu just nodded slightly. He couldn't find the breath to answer. The car hit a bump in the road, and the jolt sent a shockwave through his body. He let out a low groan that he couldn't hold back. It was a sound of pure vulnerability, stripped of all the cool action hero toughness. The driver pressed the accelerator harder. Finally, the car slowed down and turned sharply. The sudden movement made Keanu's stomach lurch, but he managed to keep himself together. They pulled up to a sliding glass entranceway bathed in harsh fluorescent light. This wasn't a movie set with props and extras. This was a real place where real people came when they were hurting. The automatic doors parted smoothly, sliding open to reveal a busy emergency room. Getting out of the car was a struggle. His legs felt like they didn't belong to him. The coordinator and the producer helped him stand, supporting his weight on either side. They walked him through the sliding doors, the cool air conditioning hitting his sweat-soaked face. The smell hit him instantly, that distinct, sharp scent of disinfectant, bleach, and old coffee. It was the smell of sickness and healing. Inside, the waiting room was crowded. People sat in plastic chairs, some holding bandages, some sleeping, some watching a small television mounted on the wall. For a second, time seemed to stand still. A few heads turned. You don't see a movie star walked in by two burly men every day, especially one looking like he might pass out at any moment. But Keanu didn't look at them. He was focused entirely on putting one foot in front of the other. He just wanted to lie down. He wanted the pain to stop. They approached the reception desk. A nurse looked up, her tired eyes widening as she recognized the face on the driver's license that was being slapped onto the counter. But her professionalism kicked in immediately. She didn't ask for an autograph. She didn't ask about the movies. She saw the color of his skin and the way he was holding his side. She grabbed a phone and spoke into it rapidly. Within seconds, two orderlies appeared with a wheelchair. Keanu didn't argue. Usually, he would insist on walking. He hated feeling weak. But right now, the wheelchair looked like the most comfortable place in the world. He sat down, leaning his head back against the plastic rest. They wheeled him away from the waiting area, through a set of double swinging doors and into a long hallway. The noise of the ER faded behind them. Here it was quieter but more intense. The lights were brighter. Doctors and nurses moved with purpose, holding clipboards and wearing scrubs of blue and green. They wheeled him into a small curtained area. It was a small space, just big enough for a bed and some machines. The fabric of the curtain was a thin, checked pattern that offered little privacy, but it was a boundary between him and the rest of the world. "Help me get him up," a doctor said. He was an older man with kind eyes and graying hair. He spoke in English with a heavy accent. Between the three of them, they managed to get Keanu from the chair to the bed. As soon as his back hit the mattress, he let out a long sigh. He was still fully dressed in the black suit from the movie. The jacket was wrinkled, the tie was loose, and the expensive shoes were scuffed. It looked strange, seeing this fictional assassin lying in a stark white hospital bed. The doctor began to examine him. He pressed gently on Keanu's stomach, asking where it hurt. Every touch was agony. Keanu flinched, his hands gripping the rails on the sides of the bed. The doctor's face was serious. He nodded to the nurse, who immediately started hooking Keanu up to monitors. She put a plastic clip on his finger to check his oxygen levels and wrapped a cuff around his arm to measure his blood pressure. The machine started beeping in a steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It was a comforting sound in a way. It meant he was still alive. The nurse inserted a needle into his vein to start an intravenous drip. She apologized when she missed the vein the first time, her hands shaking slightly. Keanu looked at her. Even through the haze of pain, he could see she was nervous. "It's okay," he whispered to her. His voice was rough, barely a whisper. "Take your time." The nurse looked up, surprised by his kindness. She smiled weakly and tried again. This time she got it. She taped the tube down and patted his hand. "You are going to be okay," she said softly. It wasn't a medical diagnosis, just a human reassurance. The doctor stepped back, looking at a chart. He turned to the producer and the stunt coordinator who were standing awkwardly near the curtain. "We need to run some tests immediately," he said. "CT scans, blood work, it could be several things." "It is serious, you should wait outside." The men hesitated, looking at Keanu. He waved his hand weakly at them. "Go," he mouthed. "I'm fine." Reluctantly, they walked out. The curtain was pulled mostly shut, leaving just a gap. Keanu was left alone with the beeping machines and the fluorescent light buzzing above him. He stared up at the ceiling tiles. There was a water stain in one corner, shaped like a map of a country he didn't know. The pain was still there, a constant, heavy weight, but the adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving him exhausted. He felt incredibly small in this big room. The movie set, with its fake buildings and scripted danger, felt like a million miles away. This was the only reality that mattered now, the fragility of his own body. He closed his eyes, listening to the beep of the monitor, and waited for the doctors to tell him what was wrong with him. The silence in the small, curtained area was heavy. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library, it was the waiting silence, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound too loud. Keanu lay on the narrow bed, staring up at the white ceiling tiles. He was wearing a flimsy hospital gown now. The black suit, the expensive shoes, the tie that had made him look like a powerful force of nature just an hour ago. They were all folded neatly on a chair in the corner. Now he was just a man in a pale blue piece of cotton that tied in the back. He felt exposed. The costume of the invincible action hero had been stripped away, leaving behind someone who was hurt and very human. A young doctor came in, holding a clipboard. He didn't smile much. He was focused. "We need to take you for a scan," he said. "We need to see exactly what is happening inside." Keanu nodded slowly. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy and sluggish. The drugs they had given him for the pain were working, but they also made his brain feel like it was floating in thick fog. 2 orderlies came in to help him. They were gentle, but moving him still sent a sharp jolt through his side. He gritted his teeth, letting out a sharp hiss of air between his teeth. "Sorry," one of the orderlies mumbled. "It's okay," Keanu whispered back. He always apologized for being in pain, as if it was an inconvenience to them. They wheeled the bed out of the curtained room and into the long, bright hallway. The journey felt long. The lights above passed by one, like strobe lights in a slow-motion movie. He saw glimpses of other rooms through open doors. People sleeping, people crying, doctors talking on phones. This was the real world. It wasn't glamorous. It was messy and painful. He felt a strange sense of calm looking at it. He was part of this now. He wasn't the star on a pedestal. He was just another patient on a gurney. They arrived at the imaging room. It was cold, much colder than the rest of the hospital. The machine was a big white donut, humming with electricity. They had to slide him off his bed and onto a narrow table that fed into the machine. The movement was the worst part. Every muscle in his stomach clenched in protest. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. In, out, in, out. He had done this in movies, pretending to be hurt, but this was different. In movies, the director yells cut, and you stand up and get a water bottle. There was no director here. There was no script to tell him how this would end. The scan took about 20 minutes. He had to lie perfectly still while the machine spun around him, making loud clicking and whirring noises. He stared at the smooth, white plastic surface inches from his face. He thought about the crew back at the studio. They were probably cleaning up the set, wondering where he was. He felt a pang of guilt. He hated letting people down. That was his biggest fear, bigger than the pain or the surgery. He had spent his life trying to be reliable, to be the one who showed up and did the work. Lying on this hard table, he felt like he was failing. When they wheeled him back to his curtained area, an older nurse was waiting for him. She had silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and kind wrinkles around her eyes. She didn't look like she watched action movies. She looked like she had seen a lot of sick people and knew how to take care of them. She fussed with his blankets, tucking the edges in around his shoulders. "You're back," she said softly. Her voice had a gentle, motherly tone. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Okay," Keanu said. "Just tired." She checked the monitors, writing numbers down on his chart. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, not as a celebrity, but as a person who was suffering. She reached out and patted his hand. Her hand was warm and a little rough. "It's scary, isn't it?" she said. "Being in here, it makes you feel small." He looked at her, surprised by her honesty. He nodded. "Yeah. It does. It's all right to feel small," she said, smoothing the hair back from his forehead. "We are all just flesh and blood in here, even the strong ones. You just rest now. We are taking good care of you." That simple touch meant more to him than anything else. It broke down the wall he had built around himself. He wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star, to her. He was just a patient who needed comfort. For the first time since the pain started, he felt like he could let go of the tension he was holding in his shoulders. He closed his eyes and let her words sink in. "We are all just flesh and blood." Time passed in a blur. He drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes he would wake up and see the shadow of someone standing behind the curtain, hear the hushed whispers of the doctors discussing his case. The words were medical and confusing, but the tone was serious. He knew it wasn't good news. Eventually, the main doctor came back. He pulled the curtain all the way closed, sealing them in. He didn't stand at the foot of the bed. He pulled a chair up and sat down so he was eye level with Keanu. That was never a good sign. "We have the results," the doctor said. His voice was calm but firm. "You have a ruptured cyst. It has caused an infection and there is some internal bleeding. We cannot wait for it to heal on its own. We need to go in and fix it surgically, tonight." Keanu took a deep breath. Surgery, the word hung in the air. He looked past the doctor for a second, thinking about the movie schedule. "How long will I be out?" he asked. "Can I film next week?" The doctor shook his head slowly. "Right now, we are not talking about filming. We are talking about your health. You need to focus on healing. The body is not a machine. You cannot just push a button and fix it. You need rest and you need this surgery." It was a hard truth to hear. He was used to pushing through, to working until he dropped. But this doctor was telling him that the game was over for tonight. The script had been thrown away. "Okay," Keanu said quietly. "Do what you have to do." The doctor nodded and stood up. "We are preparing the operating room now. It won't be long." As the doctor left, Keanu lay back against the pillow. He felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The fear of the unknown, of going under anesthesia and not knowing if he would wake up the same person, but also relief that they knew what was wrong. The mystery was over. Now it was just a battle to get better. He looked at the chair where his clothes were piled. The black suit looked like a ghost of his other life. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and touched the fabric of the jacket. It was cool to the touch. Then he pulled his hand back. He couldn't wear that suit right now. He had to wear the gown. He had to be the patient. The older nurse came back in. She had a clipboard with some papers on it. "Ready?" she asked. She didn't wait for an answer. She started checking his vitals again, efficient and caring. "The anesthesiologist is coming. He's very good. You're in good hands." Keanu looked at her face. She looked tired, maybe at the end of a long shift, but she was still smiling at him. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "You just worry about getting better," she said. "The world will still be there when you wake up." He watched her move around the small space, adjusting the IV drip, checking the bags of fluid. In this small, curtained room with the beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic, he found a moment of peace. He wasn't the one saving the world tonight. Tonight, he was the one being saved. And for a man who spent his life carrying everyone else in his movies, it was a strange, heavy, but ultimately necessary lesson to learn. He closed his eyes and waited, letting the silence wrap around him like a blanket. Ready for whatever came next. The wheels of the bed squeaked rhythmically against the linoleum floor as they pushed him out of the emergency room and down a long, narrow corridor. The movement felt smooth but unstoppable, like a train on a track. Keanu stared up at the ceiling again. He had spent a lot of his life looking at ceilings, hotel rooms, movie sets, trailers, but this one was different. The tiles here were perfectly white, without a single mark or stain. They were clean, clinical, and cold. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the hospital. It was a sterile kind of cold that bit at the skin on his arms, which were exposed outside the thin hospital gown. They passed through a set of double doors that swung open automatically. The noise of the emergency room, the shouting, the phones ringing, the crying, faded away instantly, cut off as the doors swung shut behind them. Now the only sounds were the beeping of the machine beside him and the rubber soles of the nurses' shoes squeaking on the floor. They were entering the surgical wing. This was the quiet heart of the hospital, the place where the serious work happened. The room they wheeled him into was large and brightly lit. In the center stood the operating table. It looked narrow and uncomfortable, nothing like the bed he had just left. Above it, a massive light fixture hung from the ceiling, shaped like a giant metal eye with many lenses. It was currently dimmed, but it looked ready to blind him at a moment's notice. There were monitors everywhere, showing green lines and blue waves. Trays of metal instruments gleamed under the lights, scalpels, clamps, and scissors arranged in neat, terrifying rows. A team of people in blue scrubs, masks covering their noses and mouths, and caps on their heads moved around the room with practiced efficiency. They didn't look at him like a celebrity. To them, he was just the body on the table. They checked the machines, they unwrapped sterile packages, and they talked to each other in low voices using words that Keanu didn't understand. It was a language of medicine and science, a language that excluded him from his own procedure. "Okay, Keanu," a voice said from beside his head. It was the anesthesiologist. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled behind his mask. "We are going to move you over now, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Strong hands lifted him. It was a strange feeling, being passed from one surface to another like a heavy sack of flour. He tried to help, to tense his muscles and move, but his body felt heavy and weak. The pain in his side flared up as they settled him onto the operating table, making him gasp. The table was hard and cold against his back. He shivered. "It's a bit chilly in here, isn't it?" the doctor said. He grabbed a warm blanket from a warmer in the corner, a machine that looked like a pizza oven, and laid it over Keanu's legs and chest. The warmth was a huge relief. It felt like a hug. "We'll have you fixed up and back in the warm before you know it." Keanu nodded, but his throat felt tight. He looked around the room. The overhead lights were turned on now. They were incredibly bright, forcing him to squint. He had to close his eyes against the glare. The brightness turned his vision into a field of orange and red. He felt exposed. He wasn't wearing his suit. He wasn't holding a gun. He wasn't fighting bad guys. He was just a man with a broken part inside him, about to let strangers cut him open to fix it. Fear began to bubble up in his chest. It wasn't a panic attack, but a deep, cold realization of how fragile life really is. He had cheated death 1,000 times in the movies. He had fallen off buildings, been shot at, and crashed cars, and always stood up at the end to walk into the sunset. But life didn't have a script. There was no director to yell, "Cut," if something went wrong. If his heart stopped here, it just stopped. The thought hit him with a force that was harder than any punch he had ever taken on set. The doctor was busy with the IV line. "I'm going to give you the medicine now," he said calmly. "You're going to feel a little bit of a burning sensation in your arm, and then you're going to get very sleepy. Just count backward from 10 for me." Keanu felt the cold liquid enter his vein. It felt strange, like ice water moving up his arm. He looked at the doctor's eyes. They were calm and steady. He tried to hold onto that gaze to anchor himself to something real. 10, he said out loud. His voice sounded far away, like it was coming from another room. He thought about the people waiting outside. He thought about the crew. He thought about the fans who sent him letters. He realized how much he wanted to go back. He wasn't ready for the story to end. There was still so much to do. There were still movies to make, rides to take, people to meet. The fear of missing out, of leaving the party too early, washed over him. 9, he whispered, but the word was slurred. The lights above him seemed to get even brighter, turning into a solid white wall. The edges of his vision began to darken, like a curtain closing slowly on a stage. The sounds of the machines, the beeping, the clicking of metal tools began to fade out. It sounded like he was underwater. The pain in his stomach, which had been his constant companion for hours, suddenly drifted away. It didn't hurt anymore. He couldn't feel his legs. He couldn't feel his hands. 8, he stopped counting. His mind let go of the hospital, he let go of the fear. He felt a strange sense of peace. For years, he had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He carried the grief of losing people he loved. He carried the pressure of being a symbol of strength for millions of people. He carried the responsibility of the movies. But as the anesthesia took hold, all that weight vanished. He was weightless. He was floating in a dark, quiet void where there was no pain, no expectations, and no sadness. He thought about his sister again. In the darkness, he imagined her hand reaching out to his. It wasn't a scary darkness. It was a restful one. It was the pause between breaths. It was the silence of the universe. He realized that letting go wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the ultimate act of trust. He was trusting these strangers with his life. He was trusting the universe to bring him back. In the operating room, his eyes fluttered, closed, and stayed closed. His breathing slowed down, becoming deep and rhythmic. The monitor beside his head beeped steadily, a slow, comforting rhythm. The surgical team moved in. The doctor adjusted the mask over Keanu's face, ensuring a flow of oxygen. The surgeon picked up a scalpel, his hands steady and sure. But Keanu wasn't there anymore. He was far away, drifting in a dreamless sleep where time didn't exist. He was just a consciousness floating in the dark, finally getting the rest he had denied himself for so long. The machines watched over him, standing guard, the only witnesses to his vulnerability. The hero had fallen asleep, and for now the world had to wait. The noise of the city, the lights of the set, the screams of the fans, it all dissolved into nothingness. There was only the hum of the ventilator and the steady beat of a heart that was, for the moment, being kept alive by the hands of others. The return to consciousness was not like flipping a switch. It was like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. The first thing Keanu noticed was the light. It wasn't the harsh, blinding glare of the operating room, but a soft, gray light filtering in through a window. It was the light of early morning. The second thing he noticed was the silence. The chaos of the night before, the sirens, the shouting, the panic, had been replaced by a steady, rhythmic beeping sound that was strangely comforting. He tried to take a breath, but his chest felt heavy. There was a dull ache in his abdomen, a deep throb that reminded him something had been done to his body. But the sharp, tearing agony was gone. The knife-like pain that had doubled him over on the movie set had vanished. He moved his fingers, feeling the rough texture of a blanket under his hand. He was alive. He blinked his eyes open. The ceiling was familiar now, white and tiled, but he was in a different room. It was quieter here, more private. There was a machine next to his bed monitoring his heart rate, ticking away steadily. For a long time, he just lay there, watching the green line jump up and down. Every jump meant his heart was beating. Every jump meant he was still in the game. He turned his head slowly to the side. In a chair tucked into the corner of the room, a figure was asleep. It was the stunt coordinator. He was slumped forward with his arms crossed, snoring softly. He hadn't gone home. He had stayed there all night, waiting in an uncomfortable chair just to make sure Keanu woke up. Seeing him there, looking messy and tired, brought a lump to Keanu's throat. It wasn't about the movies or the money. It was about loyalty. It was about brotherhood. Keanu realized that while he was alone on the table fighting for his life, he wasn't alone in the world. Keanu tried to speak, but his throat was dry and papery. "Water," he croaked. It was barely a whisper. The man in the chair stirred instantly. He opened his eyes, blinked a few times, and sat up. When he saw Keanu looking at him, his face broke into a wide, relieved smile. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood up, walked over to the bed, and squeezed Keanu's arm. "Hey," the man said softly. "You're back." Keanu nodded weakly. "Back." The coordinator poured a cup of water and held the straw to Keanu's lips. The cool water felt amazing as it slid down his throat. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. It was the taste of life. A few minutes later, a doctor came in. He was wearing different scrubs, looking fresh and rested. He checked the chart, looked at the machines, and gently lifted the bandage on Keanu's stomach to inspect the work. "Everything went perfectly," the doctor said. "We fixed the problem. You are going to be just fine, but you need to rest. No stunts for a while, no fighting. Just healing." Hearing those words was like a weight being lifted off Keanu's chest. For a few hours there, in the middle of the night, he hadn't been sure if he would ever hear those words again. He had faced the possibility that his story might end in a sterile room in a foreign country. But now, a new chapter was starting. The day passed slowly. Nurses came in and out to check his vitals and bring him food. He couldn't eat much, just some broth and jello, but it was enough. The producer stopped by, looking relieved but anxious. They talked about the movie for a few minutes, delicate conversations about schedules and delays, but it didn't seem important anymore. The movie was just a movie. The stunts were just tricks. But this lying in a hospital bed, grateful for every breath, this was real. By late afternoon, Keanu felt strong enough to sit up. The pain was still there, a constant reminder of what he had been through, but it was manageable. He asked the nurse to help him into a chair by the window. It was a struggle to move. His muscles felt weak, and his head spun when he stood up, but with the nurse's help he made it. He sat in the chair, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the city of Paris. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the rooftops. He could see people walking down on the street, cars driving by, and birds flying between the buildings. It was a beautiful, ordinary evening. The world had kept turning while he was unconscious. People were going home to their families, cooking dinner, and living their lives. It made him feel connected to everything in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't the action hero on the screen anymore. He was just a part of this big, messy, wonderful human experience. He thought about the years he had spent grieving in his private life, the times he felt like he was carrying the weight of the world alone. He realized now that he wasn't carrying it alone. He had people, he had the stunt guy sleeping in the chair. He had the nurses who treated him with kindness. He had the strangers who had wished him well. He felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost made him cry. It wasn't gratitude for fame or success. It was gratitude for the simple chance to be here, to see the sunset, to feel the air in his lungs. The next morning, they said he could go. It was time to leave the safety of the hospital and go back into the real world. Changing out of the hospital gown back into his clothes was a strange ritual. Putting on his jeans and a t-shirt felt like putting on a costume for a play he hadn't rehearsed for. He felt fragile, like a piece of glass that had been glued back together. He moved slowly, protecting his side. He didn't walk out alone. His team was there, hovering protectively. They walked him down the long hallway he had come down what felt like a lifetime ago. The hospital was busy again, full of noise and activity, but it didn't scare him now. He looked at the other patients with a sense of solidarity. He knew what they were feeling. He knew the fear and the pain. They reached the exit. The automatic glass doors slid open smoothly, just as they had when he arrived in agony days ago. But this time, when he stepped through them, the air didn't feel cold. It felt fresh and crisp. It was a beautiful day. The sky was a piercing blue, and the sun was warm on his face. There was a car waiting for him, the same black SUV as before. But he didn't rush to get in. He stopped on the sidewalk. He stood still for a moment, just breathing. He closed his eyes and lifted his face to the sun. He let the warmth wash over him. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of the living. It hurt his incision a little bit to breathe that deep, but he didn't care. He liked the pain. It meant he was here. It meant he was healing. He looked at his team, a small, tired smile on his face. "Let's go home," he said. He climbed into the car. As they drove away, he didn't look back at the hospital. He looked forward. He watched the city go by, watching the people living their lives. He knew that when he went back to work, it would be different. He would still do the stunts and he would still play the tough guys, but deep down he would know the truth. He wasn't invincible. He was just a man, and that was enough. He was alive, and for now, that was the only victory that mattered. The car merged into the traffic, disappearing into the flow of the city, carrying the man who had cheated death and was now just happy to be along for the ride.